Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.
Welcome to Leadership Voyage, the podcast dedicated to your pursuit of becoming a great leader. My name is Jason Wick, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 11. Here's the second solo episode that I've embarked on, and I hope you enjoy it. Before we get to it, if you've listened to this podcast a couple of times, please go ahead and review it wherever you're listening to your podcasts. Also, if you want to check out the website for the podcast, which is pretty new, you can go to leadership.voyage. That's it, leadership.voyage. You can see all the different episodes, a little bit more information about the history of the podcast and things like that. And if you're interested in coming on the show, feel free to drop me an email at startyourvoyage@gmail.com. This episode is about procrastination, something that I struggled with in starting this podcast. It's also come up in 2 of the last 3 episodes of interviews I've had. What I thought this episode could be about, it's going to be a pretty quick one, but what this episode can be about is 2 questions to ask yourself about procrastination. And the 2 phases I want to focus on are, first, just getting started with something, and then secondly, when do you know enough to move ahead? So, starting and moving ahead. Now, it might not fit perfectly into every situation, but I'd encourage you to try to think through a scenario where you have been prone to procrastinate, or perhaps you're in a situation right now where you're procrastinating. I should say that all of this is predicated on being aware that you are procrastinating. So maybe that's a little easier said than done, but I'm just going to go ahead and roll with it. So, the 2 questions to think about when procrastinating are, number 1, what are you waiting for? And number 2, what are you afraid of? What are you waiting for? That question applies to getting started. As a quick introduction to this, I want to highlight a snippet from my conversation with Erica Chestnut. She talks about a scenario where she identifies that perfectionism breeds procrastination. And in this situation, I think it's applicable to asking yourself the question, what are you waiting for? Why won't you get started? Let's hear what Erica has to say about that.
Perfectionism breeds procrastination. I connected it with progress over perfection. Like I always thought, oh yeah, I'm not a perfectionist. I make progress. I struggled with procrastination and I couldn't figure out why. I was like, why? Like, get it done, get it. And it was because it was the perfectionism hiding. It was masked inside of procrastination. It was a breeding ground for it. And so when I find that I'm stalling, or when I find that like I'm not looking at this. Like, okay, what is it that I'm not moving forward? What is the next best step? What is the thing that I'm stalling on because I don't feel it's going to be perfect, or I'm not going to show up well. And I deal with this like social media. I got to put posts out. I want to talk to people. I can't tell you the Trello board that I have of half-baked social media posts that I just need to click the button on. And you'll see people say like, I did 30 days, 90 days, 60 days, every day I posted and I got better and I got more confident and I got more comfortable. It's hard. You have to really just saying progress over perfection, I think wasn't clicking for me until I realized that it was perfectionism that was a breeding ground for procrastination.
So you heard Erica say it, perfectionism as a breeding ground for procrastination. So for me, it was interesting when I was embarking on this podcast. When I first announced it, I said that I had been thinking about doing it for 2 years. As a matter of fact, I even bought the tools and the domain and all of that stuff about 2 years in advance of launching the podcast. And I just wasn't really sure why I wasn't ready to launch. What was I waiting for? And when I asked myself that question, what was I waiting for? I realized it was exactly what Erica said. If I'm going to launch a podcast, it has to be perfect. I have to have all the right equipment. I have to have the right guests lined up. I have to have all my topics planned in advance. And what I was able to do finally leading into the beginning of 2022 was to say, my goal is to have a season, January through October, 1 episode a month, so 1 season, 10 episodes, and then I was going to reflect on the process afterwards. So for me, what was I waiting for? It was absolutely for things to be perfect in my head. But what I was able to do finally was to set a specific, measurable, actionable goal over a specific amount of time, and that's what I'm in the middle of, and you all are hearing. The second question to ponder about procrastination is, what are you afraid of? This is a little bit later on, perhaps, for people in the process of going through something. So, for example, let's say that you have to make a decision and you're getting all of this information. What are you afraid of that you're not ready to make that decision? Let's hear Terrence Lee, the introvert leader, talk a little bit about that process.
What can happen is you can ask questions and you can get to a point where you are overanalyzing. You're asking too many questions and it gets to a point where, you may never make a decision, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a certain point where you have to do what I call take imperfect action. So imperfect action basically says, okay, I might have 70% of the data that I need. I mean, I'd have 100, but I've got 70. And based on my gut, based on my experience, based on the information that I've gotten from my team members and the people I've talked to, I'm willing to take the risk of moving forward with this decision, right? So it's really about, you may never have 100% of everything that you need, but as long as you have enough information to make an informed decision, just being willing to have the courage to move forward.
What great insights from Terrence Lee, the introvert leader there. Boy, that sounds easy. It's a little bit harder than it sounds, I think, for many people. When do you know enough information to go ahead and move forward? What I said to Terrence slightly after his dialogue there was kind of citing what Jeff Bezos said in his 2016 letter to Amazon shareholders about making decisions after knowing about 70% of the information. And I actually believe that probably several of us in the business community have unconsciously adopted this 70% thing without even knowing it. But the point is, if you try to quantify it, which is hard, if you're gaining information about something, if you need to make a decision, if you're able to think about 2/3 through that process of what you theoretically could know, there probably isn't a whole lot that you're going to learn in the final third that would change the entire trajectory of what you're already thinking. So what this touches on for me is a beautiful thing: robustness versus resilience. Wanting to know 99% of information before making a decision suggests that you likely want to robustly account for anything that is potentially a factor in this scenario. Resilience says, I need to set up systems in place to respond to what happens after making a decision. And it's interesting because I think that what are you afraid of really touches on that. Maybe I'm afraid of making a mistake. Maybe I'm afraid that my decision is wrong, but there's no amount of information that's going to change that fact. You might still be afraid that you're going to be wrong at 99%. So rather than putting it off, we'll strive to make that decision maybe 2/3 of the way through the information gathering and set up systems in place to be able to respond to the new information we learn from making that decision. Again, boy, it sounds a lot easier than it is, but I do believe in one of the very last words Terrence said there, which is courage. Every decision we make takes courage because it might be wrong. And it's as simple as that, and that's just never going to go away. 2 questions to ask yourself about procrastination. 1, what are you waiting for in order to get started? Perhaps it's a situation where you're prone to perfectionism and you don't want to get going until you have it all figured out. Later down the line in gathering information for making decisions, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid that you're going to disappoint someone? Are you afraid that you're going to be wrong? Are you afraid that you're going to choose a direction that people aren't happy with? I think objectively, if we think about it, the truth is no matter how much information we know, no matter what that percentage of certainty is in information gathering, it's never 100%. Perfectionism breeds procrastination and taking imperfect action. 2 takeaways from evaluating questions about procrastination in this episode of Leadership Voyage. Everyone take care, and I look forward to hearing from you. Email me at startyourvoyage@gmail.com. Visit the website, leadership.voyage, and look forward to hearing from you.